Welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 or 9 of Season 2 of the Rain Race Podcast. Joined alongside Kyle Cuthbertson
Hi.
and our special guest for this episode. This is the first driver we've had on for a Spotlight episode since Ricky Taylor, I think, back in 2018. Braden Eves.
Hello, everyone.
This is obviously another live episode. If you are watching live with us on YouTube right now, that is fantastic, and I appreciate everybody sticking around. What that means is that you can ask some questions in the nice comment box there, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them throughout the episode. But other than that, this is going to be following roughly the same formula as format, I guess, as the rest of our what spotlight episodes. That's the word I was looking for. Where we just go over the driver's career from start to current, and just ask some random questions in the middle of it. So for those of you who don't know, Braden is the 2019 USF2000 champion, which means that this season, whenever it actually ends up starting, he will be racing in the Indy Pro 2000 Championship, the next step up the road to Indy ladder. So obviously, as many other racers in the country, you got your start in karting, but I'm kind of curious a little bit before that. How did you actually get introduced to racing in the first place? Was that something big in your family, or was that just something that you picked up on your own?
Yeah, so obviously when I'm 6 years old, I'm not necessarily consciously going to be making decisions like that, but my dad actually started, he actually just went out with some friends to do some indoor karting, and at that point he was like, me and my brother was around 10 and I was around 5 years old. So he ended up getting us into karting like the next year, and that's where it took off. He took us to a local track down in Circleville, Ohio. Real small track, about 7/10 of a mile, where it actually had a very good club at the time. So I got started in just 50cc kid karts that go around 40 mile per hour, and it all started from there.
I know, Kyle, you've mentioned before that you've done races at Circleville as well. Did you
Yeah, it's like
actually, you told me I think, I might be misquoting you here, but did you actually race against Braden in karts?
one time.
One time,
One
okay.
time.
Circleville's where I actually got my start too. It's where like people they have a list like Zach Veach. I think Hunter Ray ran there one point. It said Ray Hall. A bunch of guys from Ohio started there.
Mm-hmm. Um, and then, so after karting, you ended up. Well, I guess you moved through the ranks of karting. So you start out in the junior karts, move up through the ranks to the senior karts. But somewhere in here, you became a part of the Jay Howard driver development. Do you want to kind of explain what that was and how you became a part of that?
Yeah, so I would say racing started to get very, very serious, to the point where I was competing at the largest national races and competing at the very front, when I was around 14 years old or 15 years old in junior karting, and I was with J3 at the time, and I raced with a year with them and decided, at that point I was kind of shifting my focus a little bit towards cars. It was getting to the point where I was going to be in senior karting. Well, actually, I think I moved up halfway through that year, so I moved into senior, and then I was looking towards cars a little bit, but I had no clue where to get even started. And at that point, around the karting paddock at least, Jay Howard has a bit of a reputation for helping people get into cars, and he's always been really good at that and helping people make the transition from karts to cars. So I joined him for a year. I want to say a year and a half of karting before I moved into. He actually launched his F4 team the year after I joined his team in karting. So I started in karting with him and raced. Actually, won a lot of races in karting in SCUSA competition. So that was really good. That's where I would say, made my breakout, where people started to really pay attention to me, and I started to get results that were international wins, and results that say that basically that I thought I was ready at the time for cars. So I decided to make the move up. I was 17 years old. A bit older than a lot of people, but I feel that that was the right time for me in my career. I actually, the first race I ever did in F4, it was just a one-off, and it was kind of a little bit like if I went in and did well, then it was gonna, hopefully breed some opportunities for me. But ultimately, we didn't have the budget for much more than that one race. So I actually ended up going in a day of testing and qualified second in my first ever car race, and that was a very competitive series at the time. Kyle Kirkwood was racing in it, and he's won basically every championship now. So I was racing against him, qualified second to him, and then it ended up a second in the race in my first ever car race. Had like no experience, didn't know what I was doing, and yeah, we went from there.
Hmm. You mentioned that move up to Formula 4. How different is it going from kart racing to an actual open wheel racing series? Because that's pretty much the traditional next step up the ladder from karting as you go into a low level Formula series, at least for people going down that track. So, what was that transition like for you? Was it a bit were you skeptical at the beginning of that, or did you feel like it was a pretty natural transition?
I would say it's very similar, but at the same time, it's very different. There's certain things that you really have to get used to. Just the feeling of the size of the car was a big thing for me to get used to. I didn't necessarily know how wide my car was, how long it was, things like that. Um, I didn't know a crazy amount about weight transfer. I mean, I knew the very basics of it. That the more brake you have, basically, the more weight you have in the front. But ultimately, karting is great because the level of competition in karting is crazy high. I mean, there's so many incredible drivers in karting. The budgets are a lot lower, so there's a lot less barriers to entry, and it allows just a lot more people. So you're going to be racing against 30 or 40 people that are all excellent, excellent drivers at national level karting. So that was what really was great about karting. Now, when I moved into cars, um, it felt very foreign to me. I didn't feel like I had a whole like a stranglehold on it. I just kind of like I would go through a lap and I wouldn't really know if it was fast or not because it was just that green at the time. But ultimately, karting does a fantastic job, especially because I had a background in sim racing. So I could kind of combine the sim racing elements that I had that were, I could learn some of the basics of car racing on the simulator as well as combine that with karting and go from there.
What was the first track that you actually did a Formula 4 race on? You said you did that one off in Formula 4. What track was that at?
Yeah, I did that at Indianapolis Motor Speedway. That was the
Oh,
only
okay.
time that series went there. Yep.
Starting at a pretty high end of that. One of the most famous tracks. Um, so you went from Formula 4, and then you ended up in the Mazda Road to not. I'm sorry, Mazda. I guess it was the Mazda Road
It
to
was the
Indy.
Mazda Road to
Yeah,
Indy at the
when you
time.
when you
Yes.
started it, yes.
Giving them
Um,
a little unnecessary free advertisement there, Chris.
oh yeah,
Wow.
I like Mazda, so whatever. Going off brand a little bit. But the funny part to remember for everybody is that you're doing all of this while you're still a full-time student in high school. So you're going to all these different races, whether it was in karting or whether it was in Formula 4 or later the Road to Indy ladder. You're still in high school for the majority of this. And I was reading down the biography on your website, and I was surprised to see that you were still maintaining high academic standards while going to all these different races throughout the year. Was that a difficult thing to manage?
It was very difficult. Senior year wasn't as bad because I this is kind of embarrassing to say, but I kind of took the easy way out senior year and didn't take a lot of classes. So, but I was taking AP Calc at the time, which was one of the most difficult classes I had ever taken, or probably the most difficult class I'd ever taken. So that was very difficult. Other than that, I didn't have a huge workload. Um, but it was always, I mean, all through karting, like missing 20 days of school each year was always quite difficult, especially for the longer distance or the longer time periods. Actually, that year, 2017, which was the same year that I did my first F4 race. I went over to Italy for a karting race and then promptly came back and raced in the F4 race at Coda with WEC. So I was gone for genuinely like I want to say two full weeks of school, and I just get back and had no clue what's going on. But you never know what's going to happen, so you always have to try your hardest in education and make sure that I'm learning as much as possible. And um, now I'm kind of taking a break from it and trying to focus all on racing, but that's definitely still on the table potentially.
Mm-hmm. So you made your USF2000 debut in 2018, seeing that you only ran 2 races at the end of the season at Portland. So what was that like, getting into USF2000 car for the first time?
That was a great experience. I raced with Newman Walks Racing. That's a fantastic team. Brian Hallahan, John Hayes, a really stellar engineer. John Hayes is. It was a good operation. I was going in with, I think, a bit too high expectations, to be honest. I kind of expected myself to go in and be competitive straight away, but um, I ended up qualifying, I want to say fourth, which was really good. I mean, I remember thinking that it wasn't that good at the time because I wanted to be P1, but it was really good for me to come in after everyone. It was the last race of the season. Everyone had a full season under their belt, basically, and I just came in and qualified fourth. So that was really good. Um, and then after that, I was actually talking to Kyle Kirkwood about um, the following season, and he was like, "You got to be with Cape guys." And the Cape guys, especially after having that full season, they are so good at what they do, and they've taught me so much. I'm really glad that I went with Cape and USF 2000, and ultimately, I think everything happens for a reason. So, um, yeah, it was a good experience, especially that first race to get the experience of being in a different series. There's a couple things that are different, especially coming from F4 or even karting. There's like a couple things like the start finish line is before the last corner, and all through my whole life that hadn't been the case. And like I ran the checkered in qualifying and got a 2 position penalty in that first race. So like little things like that. It was kind of sucky at the time, but I'm glad that I did that when it didn't matter for the championship.
Mm-hmm. So you said when you went to Cape Motorsports, they had won, as you mentioned, with Kyle Kirkwood the previous season, and you really started off strong, because this is last season we're talking about now. As I mentioned, that's the championship running season, or championship winning season, I guess I should say. You won the first 4 races of the season: St. Pete, the IMS road course, and then you had another win at Road America, another win at Laguna Seca. So that's 6 wins on the board for that entire season, along with 2 extra podiums at Portland. Were you really expecting to be, I mean, in all honesty, were you expecting to be that competitive out of the gate for your first full-time season in USF 2000, or did that come as a bit of a surprise?
I definitely expected to be fighting for the championship. When you're with a team of that caliber and you have that many resources, I mean, Dominic Cape can pull up data from the last 8 champions, and you go to each track and you have every single resource possible. You expect to be in the championship run for sure. Um, I didn't expect to be like the first half of the season. It felt like I was winning every single race. I did not expect that. And when it happened, honestly, it was. Then it kind of shifted my focus. Then I was actually, honestly, after Road America, I was like, oh, I might still be able to go after Kyle Kirk's win record, but it ended up being a really close season and an extremely tough season in the end.
Mm-hmm. And now, at the end of this ladder, pretty much right now to where we are currently, which is unfortunately with no racing or no real life racing at the moment, you are in the Indy Pro 2000 Championship with Exclusive Autosport. Right now, supposed to be getting the season underway in the middle of June at Road America. Is this? I mean, I expect that this is similar to the transition you had between all the other championships, where you're just slowly learning and taking measures to understand the new car. Could you explain for people what the differences are actually, including myself, because I'm relatively new to the Road to Indy ladder, the differences between that USF2000 car that you drove last year and the Indy Pro 2000 car?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's actually the same tub. The actual cockpit that we sit in is exactly the same. The big diff and the suspension, it's the same. The big differences are going to be in aerodynamics and the horsepower, as well as the size of the tire. So we have quite a bit more downforce. The USF 2000 car only has single plane front and rear wing, as well as it has quite a bit smaller tires than Indy Pro. So we have the two plane rear wing and front wing in Indy Pro. We have a much larger diffuser. I mean, the USF has a very small diffuser. The Indy Pro has a huge diffuser, and we have an extra 100 horsepower. It's a four-cylinder, naturally aspirated, 2-liter engine, revs to 9K, has about 275 horsepower. So those are the biggest things. And also, I wanted to say I would say the biggest difference coming into this season versus any other season was the funding, the opportunity that Road to Indy gives with a scholarship. To have won that scholarship is invaluable, really. I mean, and it gives you a lot of confidence as well to have that funding and be able to focus on just racing rather than trying to put together a deal. In the past, funding has always been so tight. So
That was one thing I wanted to bring up is so last season I remember seeing you guys in the winter, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that deal with Cape was not full season at the beginning, right?
well, it was full season. It came together really, really late though. That was the big thing. I was looking. I was looking at a couple different teams. I was talking with Cape, um, and then ended up being able to put together a deal with Cape. I want to say 2 weeks before the season started or something like that. It was really late, um, and I was pretty close to be honest, at the beginning of the season. So this is a little bit off topic, but that same off season was when I had two different surgeries. So I was in the hospital, and I actually missed out on Team USA scholarship because of that. But all right, lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Your injury, the surgeries.
Oh yeah. So I had the two surgeries, and I was really banking on winning the Mazda 200K scholarship because that at the time I thought that was the only chance that I would be able to race full season. Um, and I ended up not winning that, unfortunately. My rival last season, Hunter McElray, ended up getting the scholarship. Um, but yeah, at that point it was like, oh, how am I gonna put together something for the next season? And ended up getting something together last second, and ended up winning the championship. So now in hindsight, everything's all good.
I do notice that we do have a couple people watching live right now, and I just wanted to point out you can ask any questions if you do have any for Braden as we move along, and we'll try to get to them. But the last thing I really wanted to talk about here on this subject is right now, every racer, if they're doing any racing at all, is pretty much on sim racing. You yourself included. Kyle actually just put out a video, I think, what was it, Tuesday, Kyle?
Yeah,
You driving on
got
his sim rig.
got another one tomorrow. So
So you're obviously very big into the sim racing thing. You have been for quite a while. Could you just talk about how valuable that is a tool for somebody? I mean, put yourself in the position of somebody like me who hasn't been able to do real life racing. Do you think that that's a very valuable tool for learning, not just learning tracks, but also learning the quality of racing and learning how to become a good driver on the track?
Absolutely, 100%, 10,000%. Um, that was the biggest thing was I've always been on a sim, and when you don't have millions of dollars to go and spend on a bunch of seat time, it's so useful to be able to be on a simulator all the time. Having the simulator be close enough to real. Obviously, it's not exactly the same, but close enough to where you go from the sim to real life, and it doesn't feel foreign. That's the biggest thing. And I learned a ton through my years of iRacing. I've been on the service since 2011. I was like, what, 12 years old, So I was not good at the time, but I got a lot better and I learned a lot and had a lot of fun. But ultimately, you wanna make it so that it's the least amount of time possible, so that you accelerate your learning curve as much as possible. And that's the big thing with the simulators is you can really do that. If I will be the first one to tell you, if I had never had a simulator and I had went into Indy GP into my first F4 race, I would not have gotten second had I never had a simulator. That is 100% a fact. So it's been really valuable for me in my career.
I'm just going to jump to a quick question before I get back on that topic. Noah Grimm asked, with Mid Ohio being your home track, how do you like it, or how much do you like it, I guess, and why?
Yeah, Noah's a great guy. He actually went to my high school, so that's actually really cool. He follows my racing, and um he's a great guy. But to answer his question, I struggled at Mid Ohio last year. I mean, I love the track. I struggled there last year. I'm really hungry to get some results there this year. We struggled as a team last year. I mean, I still was the quickest qualifier on my team, but we just struggled. I qualified fourth, ended up with I not the best penalty in my opinion, but two position penalty that kind of put me back into the mid pack where I got involved in some stuff. But Mid Ohio, to do well there, there would be no better feeling. So I'm definitely really driven to do well there. Whenever you're there, you feel like you have a lot of eyes on yourself from all my family, friends, fans, everyone that's there that's just following me and watching me. I feel like I put a lot of pressure on myself to perform, and I do really feel that I'm quite good there. But um, yeah, I'm looking forward to this year there. We're actually opening up the season, or at least is planned to open up the season there right now with a test. So we'll have a 2-day test there in Indy Pro before Road America, if everything stays the same as it is right now. Um, and yeah, I think Mid Ohio, it's just really cool to have all the support there, and I think to win there would be incredible. So probably the best place for me that I think I could win. So I'm going to be really pushing hard there this year.
You mentioned Mid Ohio having a huge home crowd. Kyle's always very quick to point that out to me when we get into an argument about racetracks, always telling me how many Ohioans are there rooting on their Ohio boys in the through the
It's
categories.
just a thing. You can't
Hey man,
explain it.
listen.
You have to witness it. That's how David said the same thing. Like he would not be as positive about the Mid Ohio race, when he covered it without going. And then he went last year and is like one of his favorite things. He couldn't stop talking about how cool it was at the end of the weekend. So I mean, it's just a thing. You got to go to Mid Ohio IndyCar. It's just a overall, it's just amazing. You
It
can't.
is a core. I mean, it's really hard to pass there. So it makes when people do pass, it's like the most amazing thing. I mean, some of the
Yes.
passes, I don't, it was Bourdais, right? Bourdais on the outside of, I don't know who it was a couple years ago, but Bourdais into the back straight into turn seven on the outside. That was like one of the best passes I've ever seen. I was like, whew, he was like, had an inch of room to the outside of the track and to the other guy, managed to make it work. Oh, great
Yeah, that
pass.
was that was 2018. That whole race, just I've never seen an IndyCar pull in over under going into the S's like that ever. I didn't even think that was possible. So it's like when it does happen, it's a spectacle. It's amazing.
It was on willpower, right? I'm gonna look like a terrible Bourdais fan if I'm wrong on that, but
I have to watch that race again now. You made me think of it. Now I have to watch
yeah,
it. So we'll
I
see.
think it was on willpower. Anyway, just going back to sim racing quickly, we've seen a ton of drivers, real life drivers, jump into a simulator recently from IndyCar, NASCAR, everybody with this whole pandemic going on. And to be honest, you see a lot of them actually struggling. I know the IndyCar race at Michigan, we saw probably half the drivers spinning out trying to go into pit road under green. As somebody who's been in sim racing forever, like you have, do you think that there is a difference that these real life drivers just need to adapt to when they come to sim racing for the first time?
Uh, yes. I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say because um obviously these guys are IndyCar drivers. They're great drivers. Sim racing is just it is different, and you can't ignore that. It's way easier to crash on the sim than it is in real life, and obviously you can make the argument that it's way easier because you don't care if you crash because there's no crash damage, but um, because you don't have the actual feeling of what the car is doing, it's just way easier to crash, and like a lot of the IndyCar guys are having trouble with that. But like making green flag pit stops in those cars is very difficult. Um, I don't know. I think it's just from raw experience and laps that eventually you get good, but um, I think that's the biggest thing is just you don't have the feeling, so it's way easier to crash.
You are part of the that Road to Indy Championship that is being hosted on iRacing right now. I've actually seen quite a few different approaches towards esports racing that different series are trying to do. I know NASCAR is relatively closed off in terms of their actual drivers. IndyCar has started to do some invitational drivers. We've had Scott McLaughlin doing the entire IndyCar Pro Invitational. We have Kyle Busch this weekend at Motegi. We had Dale Earnhardt Jr. last weekend at Michigan. And Formula E just announced, I believe it was earlier today, that they are going to be doing some qualifiers for just ordinary people, you or me, to race up against some of their pros in their R Factor 2 esports thing. Do you think that the Formula E approach is something that other series should look into doing, or do you think that it's better off being strictly racing drivers that are local to that series at the time?
Um, I mean, to be honest, I want to say that I think we should take a little bit more of the Formula E approach, just because I want to be in the IndyCar race on iRacing. But um, I don't know. I think, to be honest, the reason why they're doing that is because they don't want to make the drivers look bad, because a lot of the drivers are very inexperienced in the sim, and a lot of people out there would love to go against them and have a ton of experience on a sim. So I don't think that necessarily we should be having anyone in there, because if you had, say you, Kyle, if you had been told that you would be allowed to race in, I don't know, the IMSA race, I'm sure that you would be practicing nonstop for that, and probably to just to go out and try to put on a performance that everyone's like, oh my gosh, look at that Kyle Cuthbertson guy. So I think to some extent, I think they should open it up, but at the same time, it would be a bit ridiculous, in my opinion, to just be having anyone out there. So I don't know, but if you can, if it's the case like Scott though, that's always really cool. Like he wasn't necessarily racing a full season, but he gets to go out and racing against all the IndyCar guys. And the same thing with people like Sage. It's a really cool story with him being able to get more funding in real life because he's done well in the sim. Like that's really cool. So hats off to him, and it's cool. Unfortunately, there's been some negative sides to the whole sim racing thing, some controversy, but that's a whole different topic. So
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think the most negative thing about this whole sim racing thing is that we're not real racing.
that
I
is
think that's the
absolutely true.
worst.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's probably the best alternative we can have for now. But that actually is a great leeway. We're bringing it back, Kyle, into my next point
Oh,
here.
every episode has a leeway.
Oh, just
We need to
yeah,
like
we gotta call them
we
out
need to
more
make a
though.
full name for it
Of
and
course,
come up with a
A
graphic and
leeway? What does
just
that even
it's
mean?
like a segue. You know,
Oh,
sort
segue.
of an
Leeway,
introduction
yeah.
to the next topic.
Chris
was-
loves them. Chris does it nonstop.
Oh, they're fantastic. But I was gonna bring up. I mean, David Land, who's actually absent from this episode, it's kind of my fault because I just brought it up to him about 5 minutes before we were supposed to
call
start
him.
recording. Anyway, David, if you're listening, we miss you. Hopefully, you're back soon. He brought up the idea that after all of this goes away, after real racing is back, hopefully for the foreseeable future, that esports is going to die out, at least on the scale that it's on right now. Do you see any potential for, even in like the off season, just a couple of drivers saying, "Hey, let's start a championship. It's the off season. We can get some guys to stream it, and let's have some fun in these IndyCar races or do some NASCAR races." Do you see potential for that?
I do. I think 100%. there will be like F1 is doing it, IndyCar obviously on iRacing. I think 100% every off season there will be some racing on iRacing because now everyone has a simulator now. So I don't see why they wouldn't do that. But I think especially the added benefit for the sponsors, because whenever you're doing something completely different, you're going to get a whole new audience that you wouldn't have had before. So um, I think the added benefit to sponsors with basically no cost to them at all, I think that's something that they can't ignore. So I think it's really cool that there is that out there, and I think 100% they'll continue to do it in the off seasons ahead.
And then I guess jumping in already to the final section of the episode here, I wanted to ask mainly more than anything, what's your advice as somebody who's still going up through the ranks to somebody who's in karting or even somebody who's sim racing that wants to make it to the big leagues? What is your word of advice to those people? I guess overall, what your best advice for them is?
I think the
Pretty heavy
two
question, but
yeah, the two main things though that I think are the keys to success in not just racing but anything. It's self-belief. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to be extremely dedicated. If you're extremely dedicated and you have the self-belief, I don't see why anyone can't do anything. But I think those are the two big things. um, I know sometimes, every single person can have a lack of either of them at any time. Even especially last season with me, there was certain times where I was doubting myself, but ultimately you have to bring together all of your self belief and just do your best. So I'm trying to make it like anyone else is, and um, yeah, I think definitely those two things are the best advice for racing drivers.
and then what's your goal for the end of this ladder? I'm assuming it's going to be IndyCar, but is there any surprise, uh, ambitious goal that you're looking at as well?
Well, I've been involved, sorry, with Meyershank Racing for a year now, and he's been helping me out, sponsoring me through Indy Pro currently and USF2000 last year. But sorry, just we got a new message, but it distracted me. But um, I would love to do sports cars. That's I first and foremost IndyCar, 100%. But I would love to do some sports car stuff, especially with Meyershank. I think that would be really cool. 24 Hours of Daytona, one of the coolest races out there. I love the 24 Hours of Daytona. So if if I could do that, I'll take the chance in a heartbeat. But I'd say mainly, obviously IndyCar, and then sports cars on the side. I think my main ambitions.
But
If
you actually drove the NSX, right?
Yeah, I got a chance actually this past off season to drive the NSX, the Daytona Road Course. So that was really cool.
I was gonna say, if you're looking for a nice bull ring sports car race to come to, GT, you should make the road trip over to Lime Rock. It's a short race, but it's definitely a pretty physical one and a hot
Yeah,
one.
yeah, for sure.
That's just sort of location
It's kind
bias on
it's a
my
it's a
end.
random race, but that's like the one racetrack near Chris since he's in the
Yeah,
Northeast.
man, I said I got to throw in a little bit of location bias,
Gotta
but
love the Northeast.
yeah. And then you already mentioned that second question from Noah Grimm, and I actually kind of forgot about this, but it's an interesting point that I should bring up nonetheless. He said, with you putting in some of the fast laps at St. Petersburg before the season wasn't put on pause, do you expect to come out with the oh, do you expect to be able to come out when the season starts and do very well?
I think so. I mean, there's nothing has changed from St. Pete to now, other than we're a bit more rusty, but we're gonna have the test in Mid Ohio. Honestly, I think it's kind of interesting. I was just thinking about this actually earlier today, but a lot of people in Road to Indy have just gotten sims, and they're all going to be putting in a ton of time on sims. And you might think that that can make you more fresh, but if you don't know how to transition from a sim to real life, it can be a burden, and you can take a little bit of time to get up to speed. I've been doing this. I've been doing sim racing forever, so I've gone through this a million times. But a lot of the people that are newer to sim racing, it's going to be interesting to see how quickly they can acclimate to a real car again.
And the interesting thing is, like you mentioned, you guys actually did end up doing some laps at St. Petersburg. No actual on-track activity for the Indy cars, but some of the Road to Indy series actually did get some activity going on there. What was the overall feeling like as that weekend progressed? Because I know Kyle was there as well, and we talked to him about it in the last episode, both himself and David, just how it felt being there that weekend. But from a driver's perspective, would you be willing to just give a brief overview of how that weekend felt as the days went on?
Yeah, it was a very difficult weekend, emotionally, just to go through everything's fine, we're all here. I was absolutely stoked to get the season started. I was quickest in testing. We go there, and I was quickest in practice. But that was after, the whole are we racing or not? The USF2000 cars were ready to go on track. Race control was silent. Um, Nobody knew what was going on, so the race cars sat on the grid for about 3 hours before we finally got word, and they were like, "Oh, well, we're gonna need to basically, we're not going to do anything today, but we're going to race, no fans, only essential team personnel. We're going to go through the screening process. If you were on a cruise trip with the last 2 weeks, then you're not going to be able to come in. Family members are not allowed in. Everyone's not allowed in. And that whole day, that whole day where we were supposed to go on track, but we never did, that whole day was just crazy. I remember just being in a completely weird state of mind at the time and being like, okay, we're racing. I need to pull myself back into the racing mindset because I was it was a crazy day. I mean, I wasn't around, well, I was around, but not consciously around when I was 2 years old for 9/11. But, and I would never really compare that to that. But I feel like when people have described what they felt on the day of 9/11, where they were like, oh, it was a really eerie feeling. Everyone didn't know what to say. Nobody knew how to act. It was kind of that same thing where, we've been to the track, hundreds of times, and we've never experienced anything like it. And it's just everything gets thrown out of whack, and nobody knows what to do really. But it was crazy. It felt like a ghost town there. The next day, we all get there, and it's just empty everywhere.
From a race
Actually,
perspective, oh, sorry, Kyle. I was going to say from a race
I actually
perspective.
forgot that you guys sat on the grid on that Thursday, because that Thursday, that was the day the mayor was giving his thing, and we had to wait like 4 hours for it. And I remember
Yep.
I was chilling in the media center, and I think your dad texted me. He was just like, "Oh, they held him on the grid, and you guys sat there forever."
Yep.
And that there was a point in that day where your dad didn't even think he was going to be allowed in. It was just there were so many people that you spent the whole time just like not knowing who's going to get in, who's not, and then you actually had to go through that screening process on Friday before you practice. What was that like?
Yeah, yeah, on Friday, or yeah, Friday. So, that was crazy. So there was no parking inside because they were worried about people sneaking people in the trunks. We had to park miles and miles away, like down in downtown St. Petersburg, and we all got shuttled over. We had to fill out a form, like a questionnaire. They checked through it, and then we had to get a wristband. So it was weird because it was so early. And that was the other thing is everyone, they were only doing the screening for like, I want to say an hour or maybe 2 hours. So we all had to get there super early because nobody knew like if people were going to be getting rejected all the time, or we didn't know. Like there was a couple people on my team that were we weren't sure that they were going to be able to get in. Um, so we were concerned on that behalf, and um, yeah, it was crazy. I mean, but once you get in and get the wristband, then you're all good. But the whole process, nobody knew what was going to happen, so we were all planning for the worst and hoping for the best, really.
I was going to say from a race perspective, it kind of felt like and I wasn't obviously conscious for this when it actually happened, but the 2001 Firestone Firehawk kart race at Texas, where you have an obvious problem going on, but it kind of feels a bit late in the stage to just cancel the race. That's kind of what that weekend felt to me while it was going on.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say. Um, I still, to some extent, feel like we should have gone on with the weekend just because we were all there. We were all together for weeks before that. I don't really think that going through with a race would have added any risk at all. But ultimately, I don't think it was their decision at all. It was the government's decision, to be honest. The series really wanted to go down with and or go through with the race, but I think it was some higher up powers that ended up shutting it down, and it was quite unfortunate.
I think that was the big. I think that's what most people that were there thought. It was like, especially after Thursday when they made a decision not to cancel. It's like we're all here. We've been here all day together. All the cars have gone through tech. Everyone's, if someone's gonna get it, then it's too late now to just. So, yeah, it was so weird. It's so weird. But the one thing taking away now in hindsight is, once we get back racing and once everything gets going, we're gonna look back on that weekend and be like, well, at least we were there for it and weren't just sitting at home, because that's a story. It's crazy.
Yeah, that is a story. That's
Mm.
for sure.
Like I said in the last episode, Kyle, that's a story for the grandkids in 60 years. Just well, I was your age. No, but I mean, I feel like if there's any reason that they ended up postponing that race, well, at least for now, we're hearing that it's postponed to the possible IndyCar season finale. It's just that you would have had, no matter what you say or no matter what you try to enforce, you would have had people trying to watch the on-track activity, whether it's on top of a parking garage or right outside the actual course facility, and they just probably didn't want to be liable for it. But I mean, you can go back all day long and just sort of argue about should that have happened, should it have not happened. It was really just a tricky situation for everybody there.
Yeah, I think ultimately it was just so fluid at the time, and it went from being that first day on Wednesday when I got all my gear checked and everything. I actually was in one of the there was actually a karting race that was for a charity, and the mayor spoke there. It was like the mayor's charity event or whatever it was called. I forget what it was called at the time, but the mayor spoke. He was like, "Oh, well, at this point, we do not feel that we will have any issue going through a St. Pete. St. Pete is mostly local people, anyways, and they said that on the news, and then the next day everything is changed and every single thing is canceled. The NBA is canceled. All flights to Europe are being shut down within this many days. So
Sure.
ultimately, I think at the time it was just so fluid, and I think they also saw that if you go one day to the next going from everything's fine to everything being canceled, you have to assume the same thing is going to happen the next day, and that's exactly what ended up happening. So
Yeah, like when we were at dinner on that Thursday, or no, that was Wednesday. Uh, I don't think all four of us. I don't think any of us had a single thought that the weekend wouldn't go on fine. And then we get back after, and the NBA's canceled, the EU travel ban, everything, and Sebring, it was actually canceled that night, and it's just, man, just a few hours how everything just shifted immediately. It was just, it's still, can't say it enough. It's so odd.
yeah, it was odd and really unfortunate. That was a tough. I mean, I'm actually glad that I drove down because I was doing some testing in Homestead, so I was there for about two weeks. So I wanted to have my car there, so I just drove down. I don't really mind long distances, anyways. But I was pretty glad that I had driven down when I was coming back. I mean, it was a long drive home. Don't get me wrong, but I did not want to get on a plane with all those people at that point.
Oh, it was awful. It was awful getting on a plane. It was just terrible. And getting on, there were a bunch of cancellations, and it's like ev- there was a billion people trying to get home at that very day. It was just insane.
Sucks
Yeah.
to end the episode on a sad note. But
Say
I guess,
something nice.
oh yeah, I was gonna. Well, that's what I was gonna try to do because you can end the episode on a sad note. But hopefully the season gets underway as it's scheduled right now at Road America. Um, And hopefully I'll end up seeing you, Braden, on track in August at Indy for the. What is it still called the Carb Night Classic? Despite it's on Saturday now, isn't it?
I don't even
I
know.
think it is on Saturday night. Yeah, it is Saturday
It's
night.
night before the 500
Yeah.
now.
But I think it's still being called the
Is
Carb Night
it?
Classic.
Yeah, night before the 500.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that we're the one that broke that news to you. But anyway, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this episode. As I said at the beginning of the last episode, stay safe, follow the recommendations sent out by the CDC or your local health organizations. We're all trying to get through this thing together, and that's a continued battle that we're still in right now. If you're new to the channel and this is your first time watching, you can subscribe. We're going to be doing some more podcasts in the future. Hopefully, my goal is to try to get 2 a month out now. I know it's been exactly a month to the day since we've gotten our last one out, but I'm going to try to get a little bit better at that. And if there are any guests that you would like to see, send us a message on our Twitter. It's at Rain Race Podcast. Also, go check out these guys. I'll have their stuff. I'll have Kyle's YouTube channel linked in a card at the top right. I'll have Braden's social media in the description. So go check them out as well. They deserve this support and love for being kind enough to join on this episode. Any last remarks, guys?
Oh, I mean, thanks everyone who's watching. Thanks everyone who's gonna watch it after it's posted. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks for having me.
And you can listen to us outside of YouTube. You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, all that good stuff. It's also in the link on our Twitter. Once again, it's at Rain Race Podcast. So that's going to wrap it up for this episode. Hope you all enjoyed. Stay safe, and we hope to see you in the next one.